The Apache woman who became his wife. I just need a place to stay for one night. Jake Miller heard the knock just as he loaded his rifle. 3 sharp raps on weathered wood, deliberate and careful. Nobody knocked like that in these parts unless they were running from something. He crossed his cabin in 4 strides, pressing his back against the wall beside the door. "State your business," he called out. "I need shelter. Just one night." The voice was female, accented, strained with exhaustion. Jake cracked the door open with his boot, rifle raised. The woman on his porch wore buckskin clothing dark with blood. Not all of it hers, he figured. Her black hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her eyes carried the kind of hardness that came from surviving things most people didn't. She swayed on her feet. "You bring trouble to my door?" Jake asked. "The trouble is already here. 6 riders, maybe 7. They killed my brother 2 hours ago near the canyon." She glanced over her shoulder toward the tree line. "They are hunting me now." Jake recognized the look in her eyes. Apache. He'd fought alongside Apache scouts during the war, knew their ways. This woman wasn't lying, and she wasn't begging. She was stating facts. "How far behind you?" "Close enough." She pressed a hand to her side where blood seeped through her shirt. "I led them in circles, but they have a tracker." "A good one." Jake made his decision in half a heartbeat. He grabbed her arm and pulled her inside, slamming the door shut. She stumbled but caught herself against his table, leaving a red handprint on the wood. "Can you shoot?" he asked. Better than most men." "Then you'll need to prove it." Jake moved to the window, peering through the gap in the shutters. Dust rose from the valley road. "Riders, coming fast. They're here." The woman straightened despite her wound. "My name is Nina. If we survive this, you should know who fought beside you. Jake Miller." He tossed her a revolver from his gun belt. "There's a Winchester over the fireplace? Take it." Nina caught the revolver with her left hand, her right still pressed to her bleeding side. She moved to the fireplace without hesitation, pulling down the rifle and checking its chamber with practiced efficiency. "How many bullets do you have?" she asked. "Enough to make them regret coming here." Jake positioned himself at the front window while Nina took the side. The riders were close now, 7 of them, spreading out as they approached the cabin. The lead rider wore a marshal's badge, but Jake knew better than to trust that. Plenty of men wore badges out here who had no right to them. The man raised his hand, signaling his companions to halt 50 yards from the cabin. "Send out the Apache woman," the marshal called. "This doesn't concern you, whoever you are." Jake looked at Nina. She met his eyes, unflinching. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. "I killed the man who murdered my family." She raised the Winchester, and I would do it again. Jake turned back to the window. The marshal sat easy in his saddle, too confident for a man facing an unknown enemy. That meant he thought he had the advantage. Jake counted the riders again. 7 men, all armed with rifles. Poor odds, but he'd faced worse. "The man you killed," Jake said, keeping his voice low. "Who was he?" "A rancher named Dutch Carver. He wanted our land near the river. When my father refused to leave, Carver came with his men. They burned our home. Killed my parents. My brother and I escaped, but they have been hunting us for 3 weeks." Nina's jaw tightened. "Yesterday, they found us." Jake knew the name. Dutch Carver owned half the territory, and he owned most of the men who were supposed to keep the law. That badge the marshal wore probably came from Carver's pocket. "That marshal out there," Jake said, "he's one of Carver's men? His name is Cole Bennett." "Carver's cousin?" Nina shifted her position, wincing as the movement pulled at her wound. He will not stop until I am dead," the marshal called out again. "You got 1 minute to send her out. After that, we burn you out." Jake weighed his options. The cabin was solid, built from thick pine logs with narrow window slits. Good for defense, but not against 7 men with time and ammunition. They'd surround the place, wait for darkness, then rush from all sides. Or they'd simply burn it like they'd burned Nina's home. "Can you ride?" Jake asked. "If I must." There's a canyon 3 miles north, narrows down to a passage barely wide enough for 2 horses. We get there, we can hold them off. Jake moved away from the window, heading for the back room. "I've got a horse in the stable out back. You take her and go. I'll keep them busy here, then follow." "They will kill you." "Maybe. But you'll be gone, and that's what matters." "No." Nina's voice carried an edge sharp as broken glass. "I will not run while another person dies for me. We fight together, or I walk out there now and end this? Jake studied her face. Blood loss made her pale, but her eyes burned with determination. She meant every word. He'd seen that look before in soldiers who'd reached the point where death seemed preferable to more running. We do it your way, but we're not dying in this cabin. He moved quickly, gathering ammunition and supplies. From a chest beneath his bed, he pulled out a leather satchel filled with dynamite sticks he'd kept from his mining days. Nina watched him with growing understanding. You plan to blow them up? I plan to give them something to think about while we ride out. Jake stuffed the dynamite into a canvas bag. There's a root cellar with a tunnel that leads to the stable. Old escape route the previous owner built. We go through there, get to the horses, then circle around behind them while they're watching the front door. And the dynamite? Jake grinned, though there was no humor in it. Insurance. We light the fuses, leave them in here, and when those boys decide to rush the cabin, they'll get a surprise. The marshal's voice boomed again. Time's up. Boys, spread out. Anybody moves in that cabin, shoot 'em. Jake heard horses moving, boots hitting dirt. They were positioning themselves. He handed Nina a leather coat from his closet. Put this on. Stop the bleeding best you can. While she wrapped the coat tight around her midsection, Jake prepared the dynamite. 3 sticks, fuses cut to different lengths. Long enough to give them time to escape, short enough that the riders wouldn't have time to discover them before the explosion. He placed them carefully around the cabin's main room, near support beams and the stone fireplace. Ready? He asked. Nina nodded, clutching the Winchester despite her weakening grip. Jake led her to the root cellar entrance, hidden beneath a rug near the kitchen. The wooden door opened to reveal earthen steps descending into darkness. He grabbed a lantern and started down, Nina following close behind. The tunnel was narrow, barely 4 feet high, forcing them to crouch as they moved through packed dirt that smelled of roots and clay. They emerged in the stable where Jake's mare and a paint horse waited. Jake had bought the paint just 2 weeks ago, thinking he might need a spare. Now he thanked whatever instinct had guided that decision. You take the paint, Jake said, quickly saddling both horses. She's fast and sure-footed. Nina pulled herself into the saddle with visible effort, her face gray with pain. Blood had soaked through the coat. She wouldn't last long without proper treatment, but first they had to survive the next hour. Jake mounted his mare and guided both horses quietly out the stable's back entrance. The riders were all focused on the cabin's front, exactly as he'd hoped. He could see them taking positions behind trees and rocks, rifles ready. We ride hard for that canyon, Jake whispered. Don't stop for anything. The dynamite? Jake pulled out his pocket watch. 2 minutes until the first one blows. Let's be gone when it does. They urged their horses forward, moving at a walk until they cleared the immediate area, then breaking into a gallop. Behind them, Jake heard a shout. Someone had spotted them. Rifles cracked, bullets whining past, but they were already racing toward the tree line. Then the world exploded behind them in a roar of splintering wood and thunder. The blast wave hit them like a physical force, nearly unseating Nina from her saddle. Jake glanced back to see his cabin transformed into a ball of orange flame and black smoke. Debris rained down across the clearing. 2 of the riders' horses had bolted, throwing their men. The others scrambled for cover, thinking they were under artillery attack. Jake and Nina crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at their faces. The paint horse stumbled on a root but recovered, driven forward by Nina's desperate urging. Behind them, angry shouts rose above the ringing in Jake's ears. The confusion wouldn't last long. Cole Bennett was a bastard, but he wasn't stupid. He'd figure out what happened and come after them with murder in his heart. They rode hard for 20 minutes before Nina started to slip sideways in her saddle. Jake saw it and grabbed her arm, steadying her. Her face had gone white as bone, and fresh blood darkened the leather coat. Stay with me, Jake commanded. Canyon's just ahead. I cannot, Nina gasped. Too much blood. You go. Leave me. Jake slowed his mare, bringing both horses to a stop beneath a cluster of pine trees. He dismounted and reached up for Nina, who half fell into his arms. Her weight was slight, but she was dead weight now, barely conscious. Jake laid her on the ground and tore open the coat. The wound in her side was worse than he'd thought, a deep gash that needed stitching. He pulled off his shirt and pressed it against the injury, applying pressure. Nina's eyes fluttered. Listen to me, Jake said firmly. You're not dying here. You killed the man who deserved it, and you're going to live to tell about it. Behind them, maybe a mile back, he heard horses. Bennett and his men were coming, and they were coming fast. Jake had minutes at most. He worked quickly, tearing strips from his shirt and binding Nina's wound as tight as he dared. It wasn't proper medicine, but it would slow the bleeding. He got her back on the paint horse, this time securing her with rope around the saddle so she wouldn't fall. She mumbled something in Apache, words he didn't understand, but her eyes focused on him with fierce gratitude. They rode on, slower now, with Jake leading Nina's horse. The canyon entrance appeared through the trees like a crack in the earth's face, 2 walls of red rock rising up on either side of a narrow passage. Jake guided them inside, just as the first riders appeared on the ridge behind them. A bullet spanged off the rock near Jake's head. He ducked and spurred his mare deeper into the canyon. The walls closed in around them, blocking the afternoon sun and plunging them into shadow. The passage twisted and turned, barely wide enough for the horses to pass through in single file. Perfect defensive ground if he could get Nina to safety first. The canyon opened into a small basin surrounded by high walls. A spring bubbled up from the rocks, feeding a pool of clear water. Jake had been here before, years ago, and he'd remembered it for moments exactly like this. There was a shallow cave in the northern wall, hidden behind a curtain of vines. He guided the horses to it and carefully lifted Nina down. Inside the cave, he laid her on the driest patch of ground he could find and checked her wound again. The bleeding had slowed, but her breathing was shallow. She needed a doctor, supplies, time to heal, none of which they had. "Nina," he said, shaking her shoulder gently. "Stay awake. Talk to me." Her eyes opened, unfocused. "My brother. His name was Joseph. He was only 16. I'm sorry. He wanted to be a rancher. Raise cattle like the white men do." Nina's laugh was bitter and weak. Carver took that dream and burned it. Jake heard horses entering the canyon. Bennett's voice echoed off the stone walls, calling orders to his men. They were searching, but the basin had 3 possible exits, and Bennett would have to choose carefully. That bought time, but not much. "I need you to hold on a little longer," Jake said. "Can you do that?" "Why do you help me?" Nina asked, her eyes clearing slightly. "You do not know me. You could have turned me away." Jake considered the question. Why had he helped her? Maybe because he'd seen too many innocent people suffer at the hands of men like Carver. Maybe because something in Nina's eyes reminded him of his sister, dead now 5 years from fever. Or maybe because he was tired of running from fights that needed fighting. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. Nina's hand found his, her grip surprisingly strong. "Then I will live. For Joseph. For my parents. And because you gave me the chance." Jake squeezed her hand and moved to the cave entrance, rifle ready. Through the vines he could see riders moving through the basin, spreading out to search. 5 men. That meant 2 had stayed at the canyon entrance to prevent escape. Bennett was taking no chances. One rider dismounted near the spring, kneeling to examine the ground. He was tracking them, following the horse's hoof prints in the soft earth around the water. The man's head turned slowly, scanning the cave walls. His eyes passed over the vines once, then came back. Jake saw the moment of recognition in the tracker's face. The man opened his mouth to shout, and Jake shot him. The rifle's crack shattered the canyon's silence. The tracker pitched backward into the spring, blood clouding the clear water. The other riders whirled, searching for the source of the shot. Jake fired again, catching a second man in the shoulder and spinning him out of his saddle. "There!" Bennett's voice roared. "The cave behind the vines." Surrounded, Jake pulled back into the shadows as bullets tore through the vines and shattered against the cave walls. Rock chips flew like shrapnel. He crawled to where Nina lay, shielding her body with his own as the barrage continued. The sound in the enclosed space was deafening, a continuous thunder that made thought nearly impossible. Then, suddenly, silence. Jake's ears rang in the absence of gunfire. He heard Bennett's voice, calmer now, calculating. "You've got nowhere to go. Toss out your weapons and the woman, and maybe we'll let you walk away." "Maybe isn't good enough," Jake called back. He was buying time, trying to think of a way out. The cave had no back exit. "Then you'll die in there. We've got all the time in the world, and you've got a wounded woman bleeding out. How long do you think she'll last?" Jake looked at Nina. Her eyes were open, watching him. Despite her pain, despite the fever starting to flush her cheeks, she managed to shake her head. "Do not surrender." He hadn't planned to. "Tell me something, Bennett," Jake called. "You really think Carver is going to reward you for this? You burned down my cabin, murdered innocent people. That's going to bring the real law down on all of you." Bennett laughed. "There is no real law out here, friend. Just the law Carver pays for. Nobody's going to ask questions about one dead drifter and an Apache woman who killed a prominent rancher. We'll be heroes for bringing in a murderer. Jake had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made his blood run cold. This wasn't about justice. This was about covering up Carver's crimes by eliminating witnesses. Nina wasn't just fighting for her life anymore. She was the only living proof of what Carver had done. "What about Joseph?" Jake called. "Nina's brother." "Where's his body?" Silence from outside. Then Bennett's voice, harder now. "How do you know that name?" "She told me everything before she died." Jake was gambling now, hoping to shake Bennett's confidence. Wrote it all down, too. Every detail about how Carver murdered her family. Burned them out, stole their land. That document's in a safe place. You kill me, it goes to the territorial governor. It was a bluff, but a good one. Jake heard urgent whispers outside, Bennett conferring with his men. They were worried now, and worried men made mistakes. Behind him, Nina whispered, "There is another way out." Jake turned to her. "What?" "When I hid here this morning before I came to your cabin, I explored this cave. In the back there is a crack in the rock. Narrow, but I fit through it. It leads to a ledge on the canyon wall." Hope surged in Jake's chest. "Can you make it through again?" "In your condition? I must. We both must." Nina struggled to sit up. "But they cannot know we are leaving. We need a distraction." Jake understood immediately. He moved to the cave entrance and called out again. "Bennett, I've got a proposition for you." "I'm listening." "You let the woman go. She rides out of here, and you don't follow. In exchange, I'll give you the document I mentioned. Every copy of it. Nobody ever has to know what Carver did." Bennett's response was immediate and mocking. "And I should trust you why? Because I don't care about Carver's land disputes. I just want the woman to live. She's suffered enough." Jake kept talking, keeping Bennett engaged, while Nina dragged herself toward the back of the cave. "You get what you want, I get what I want. Everybody walks away." "Except you're lying," Bennett called back. "There is no document." "You're stalling." "Maybe I am," Jake admitted. "Or maybe you're about to make the biggest mistake of your life by letting proof of Carver's crimes reach Santa Fe." More whispered conversation outside. Jake glanced back and saw Nina disappearing through a crack in the rock he could barely see, even knowing it was there. She turned back, gesturing for him to follow. He fired 3 quick shots through the vines to keep Bennett's men down, then ran for the back of the cave. The crack was impossibly narrow, barely wider than his shoulders. Jake had to turn sideways and exhale completely to squeeze through. Sharp rock tore at his skin as he scraped through the gap. For one terrifying moment he stuck fast, unable to move forward or back. Then Nina's hands found his, pulling, and he popped through like a cork from a bottle. They were on a ledge no wider than 2 feet, 50 feet above the canyon floor. The rock face above them was sheer and unclimbable. Below, jagged boulders waited to break anyone who fell. To their left, the ledge narrowed to nothing. To their right, it curved around the canyon wall and out of sight. "This way," Nina whispered, moving right with the confidence of someone who'd already traveled this path. Jake followed, pressing his back against the rock face and edging along. One slip would mean death. His boot knocked loose a pebble that clattered down the cliff face. Below them, Bennett's voice erupted in anger. "They're gone! Find them!" Jake and Nina moved faster, rounding the curve just as a face appeared at the cave entrance below. The ledge widened slightly, then connected to a game trail that switchbacked down the canyon wall. They were exposed here, visible to anyone who looked up, but they were also moving, putting distance between themselves and their pursuers. Nina stumbled, and Jake caught her. Her breathing was labored, each step an obvious effort. The wound had opened again, leaving a trail of blood drops on the stone. "Almost there," Jake lied. He had no idea where this trail led, but anywhere was better than that cave. The trail descended into a ravine, thick with pine and cottonwood. Jake heard water running somewhere ahead. They pushed through undergrowth until they emerged at a creek bed, the water shallow but fast-moving. Their horses were long gone, probably rounded up by Bennett's men. They were on foot now, and Nina was fading fast. Jake helped her into the shade of a large boulder and examined her wound. The bleeding was worse. The makeshift bandage was soaked through. He needed to stop it properly or she'd die within the hour. "Stay here," he told her. "I'll find something to help." Nina grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "Do not leave me." "I won't, I promise." Jake gently freed his arm and moved upstream, searching. What he found was better than he'd hoped for. An old trapper's lean-to, half collapsed but still containing supplies, a rusted pot, some rope, and most importantly, a tin box with a wax seal. Inside were needles, thread, and a small bottle of whiskey. He returned to find Nina unconscious, her breathing shallow. Working quickly, Jake cleaned the wound with creek water and whiskey. Nina woke screaming when he started stitching, but he held her down and continued. 8 stitches to close the gash, each one a small agony for both of them. When he finished, he wrapped her side with strips torn from the trapper's blanket. Nina passed out again, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion and blood loss. Jake kept watch, rifle ready, listening for sounds of pursuit. The sun sank lower, painting the canyon walls red and gold.
He knew Bennett wouldn't give up.
Men like that never did. An hour passed. Then 2. Nina's fever spiked, and Jake used creek water to cool her face and neck. She mumbled in her delirium, speaking Apache and English mixed together. She called for Joseph, for her parents, for Jake to run and save himself. He stayed, keeping pressure on her wound when fresh blood seeped through the bandages. As darkness fell, Jake heard horses, not from the direction they'd come, but from downstream. He raised his rifle, then lowered it when he recognized the riders. 2 Apache men, older, riding with the easy confidence of people who knew this land like they knew their own hands. They stopped their horses when they saw Jake, their eyes taking in everything in seconds. "She is Nina," one of them said. It wasn't a question. Joseph's sister. "You know her?" "She is my niece." The man dismounted. "I am Samuel. This is my brother George. We have been searching for Nina and Joseph since their family was killed." Relief flooded through Jake. "She's hurt bad. Needs proper medicine." Samuel knelt beside Nina, examining Jake's stitching with a critical eye. He grunted approval. "You did well. She will live." He looked up at Jake with dark, evaluating eyes. "You are the one who destroyed your own home to save her?" "Word travels fast. We passed Bennett's men."
"They are searching the northern canyons. They will not find us here."
George had dismounted too and was gathering plants from along the creek. "This will help with infection and fever." Samuel produced a leather pouch and began mixing a paste from the plants George had gathered. Jake watched, fascinated, as the 2 men worked with practiced efficiency. They clearly knew medicine far better than he did. "Why did you help her?" Samuel asked as he applied the paste to Nina's wound, replacing Jake's crude bandages with proper dressings. Jake thought about that. "She knocked on my door asking for help. That's reason enough." Samuel studied him for a long moment. "You could have turned her away. Most would have. I'm not most people." George spoke for the first time, his English slower than his brother's. "Bennett will not stop hunting. Carver has too much to lose if Nina lives to speak against him. Then we make sure she lives to do exactly that," Jake said. "Territorial governor needs to hear what happened. Needs to hear about the murders, the land theft. All of it." Samuel nodded slowly. "This is dangerous. Carver has many friends in high places. Then we'll find higher places. Federal marshal, maybe, or a newspaper back east. Somebody who'll listen." Nina stirred, her eyes opening. The fever had broken, and though she was weak, her gaze was clear. She saw her uncles, and tears streamed down her face. Samuel spoke to her in Apache, his voice gentle. She responded in the same language, then turned to Jake. "Thank you," she whispered in English, "for everything. Thank me when we finish this," Jake said. "Carver still needs to answer for what he's done." Nina's hand found his again, and she held it tight. "You could walk away now. My uncles will protect me. You have lost your home because of me. You owe nothing more." Jake looked at her properly for the first time since the shooting started. Really looked at her. Past the blood and the dirt and the pain, he saw strength and courage and a fierce determination to see justice done. He saw someone worth fighting for, worth standing beside. "Maybe I'm not ready to walk away," he said. Samuel and George exchanged glances. George smiled slightly. "Then you ride with us," Samuel said. "We go to Santa Fe, we tell the truth about Dutch Carver, and we make him pay for what he has done." Nina squeezed Jake's hand tighter. Together? Jake thought about his destroyed cabin, his scattered life, his uncertain future. Then he thought about Nina fighting to stay conscious on the trail, about her brother Joseph who'd wanted to raise cattle, about her parents who died defending their home. He thought about justice and courage and doing what was right even when it cost everything. Together, Jake agreed. They rode out at dawn, 4 people bound by circumstance and choice. The journey to Santa Fe would be long and dangerous. Bennett and his men would hunt them every mile. But they rode anyway, carrying the truth with them like a weapon, determined to see it used. 6 months later, Dutch Carver stood trial for murder and land theft. The testimony of Nina and her uncles, supported by Jake's witness account and evidence gathered by federal marshals, was enough to convict him. Carver died in prison the following winter. Bennett fled to Mexico and was never seen again. Jake and Nina married the spring after the trial, on land the territorial government returned to Nina's family. Together they built a ranch that honored Joseph's dream. They raised cattle and horses, and their home became known as a place where justice mattered and people in trouble could find help. Nina never forgot the night she knocked on a stranger's door asking for shelter, and Jake never regretted opening it. Sometimes one night changes everything. Sometimes saying yes to helping someone in need sets you on a path you never imagined, but couldn't imagine leaving. Their story became legend in the territory, told around campfires and in saloons. The Apache woman and the cowboy who stood together against corruption and won. Who proved that courage and justice could triumph over money and power if good people were willing to fight for what was right. And every year on the anniversary of that first meeting, Jake and Nina stood on their porch at sunset, watching the land they'd fought so hard to protect, grateful for the choice they'd made to stand together when it mattered most.